So Greg's going to be joining a little bit late in a couple minutes. So I wanted to go ahead and get started because today we have two very special guests, Bruce and Robert Loveless, and we're talking about this release, Film Noir. So we're up to IP009. I got Jackson Del Rey's scribble on the front and Bruce is on the back, but
All right.
I did want to, yeah, and a hand. I did want to mention that this is the second Savage Republic release, the first single. So Tragic Figures, of course, was the first. The singles are some of my favorite IPR releases, I have to say. And I think
right.
I wanted to start off by saying there's a little change in the band. So Bruce, Jackson Del Rey, and Mark are back, but Jeff Long is out, and we have a new person with Robert Loveless. So I think it would be a perfect time, Robert, you could introduce yourself and explain how you ended up to be as part of this project.
Well, when I was approached by Phil Drucker, I worked at AES, which is Audiovisual Services, or AVS, at UCLA. We worked there together, and he asked if I wanted to, I don't know, come to a rehearsal, I think it was, or something.
Oh.
He knew that I had a Casio. I have a modified Casio. This was in '82, I think.
Yeah,
I think.
Right.
Yeah, I think it would have been 82. Yeah.
82. I had a keyboard, and I don't know, we got along together and at work, and he asked if I wanted to come to a rehearsal. I kind of remember the very first rehearsal, I think, was at your house, Bruce, and I think he showed up late. I kind of remember I felt really awkward because the guy that invited me to the rehearsal, maybe I'm misremembering it, but
that sounds vaguely familiar because I remember we did a few rehearsals in my parents' garage, and
yes, they were in your parents'
I grew up, and actually a couple of those songs are on that Tape Excavation album that we ended up just releasing an expanded version of, which I need to send you some copies of. So. Or did I send you copies?
You did, and
okay, good.
I just got them. Anyway, I came to a rehearsal, and then kind of got. I could tell Bruce was like scratching his head, like, I'm not sure if I want keyboards in this band, but somehow we got along. I mean, he's a lovely person, and anyway, he's very cordial, and anyway, it all kind of worked. And I remember going to Radio Tokyo. And I guess I was invited to a recording session, and they were finishing the recording of the first LP. And I remember walking down the street with the band, and Jeff Long had just written some lyrics to either Machinery or Mobilization. I can't remember which. And he just kind of pulled them out of his pocket, like, hey, I wrote some lyrics to Machinery or Mobilization. Hey, do you mind if I do them? And we looked at them, or I didn't look at them. I think Phil and Bruce looked at them and go, yeah. And then they went back to the studio, and I kind of remember listening to them record his vocal on that, and it was kind of mind blowing. It was great.
Wow.
So that was the earliest memory I have, I think, was Radio Tokyo. Very confined space. It was a converted house.
Yeah.
A small converted house. It was very dead and confined, and it was kind of neat, though.
So that probably would have been Mobilization, because the way that the Film Noir single came about was after we had finished recording Tragic Figures. Ethan James, who ran Radio Tokyo, decided he wanted to put out a compilation album of bands that had recorded at his studio or that he wanted to record at his studio, which became the Radio Tokyo tapes, Volume 1. And this being the first time he had done that, he said, I'll record 3 songs for you for free if I can use one of them on this compilation.
Oh.
And so we did that, and so we decided to put Mobilization on the compilation, and then we did Film Noir and O Andonis, and so, and I think Ethan James basically realized very soon that he was being very generous, and so for future compilations, I think he just said, "I'll record one song." So, and it makes sense, but he really wanted to kind of get the bands that he wanted for that compilation. So I think that was why he offered that. And basically Jeff Long had left the band around the time that Tragic Figures was released. And
which is a little later than the recording, obviously, so because I did the West Coast tour with you guys.
Yeah, so, well, that was early '83 was the West Coast tour. He left the band, and then Tragic Figures came out and started getting a lot of attention, and he suddenly realized, hey, things weren't working out with Wasted Youth, and we got a cool thing going, so he came back. So basically what we had done is that when he left, that's when, my memory says, that's when you came in, Robert, and we started working on this new material with Phil and Mark, and we ended up doing a couple of shows as Final Republic because it didn't seem like it was the same thing. And so there's a couple of those recordings as well. And I think actually maybe those garage recordings that you contributed to on Tape Excavation I considered them Final Republic. And then when Jeff came back, it was like, okay, I guess we're Savage Republic again, but now we're 5 pieces and we've got this cool keyboard,
Yeah.
Then we continued playing, and we did that West Coast tour up to Vancouver in early '83, I'm pretty sure. And then Jeff finally left the band after the Mojave Exodus show in April of '83. That was when he left for good.
I see.
Well, that's interesting. So at the Radio Tokyo session, you recorded Mobilization, Film Noir, and O Andonis from this, right? So, but Jeff isn't included on the single?
Yeah, I believe, as far as I remember, we had worked on the songs for the single when Jeff was not part of the group.
Okay.
And then he came back, and we decided to pull Mobilization, which had been an instrumental song up to that point. And we thought, okay, that'll be a good one to do. It's a great song. And then that's, what you're remembering, Robert, would be him going, hey, I wrote some lyrics for this, and
interesting.
From that point forward, it was a vocal song,
Wow.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. So was the intention when you recorded those 3 songs and one of them to be used for Radio Tokyo, was the intention that it would be this single, or were you thinking it was going to be part of a larger project?
I think we just figured, well, we don't have other songs worked out yet. We've been working on those songs, and we just thought, well, this will be a great opportunity to do a single. So.
Robert, you're listed as playing keyboard on Film Noir and bass on the cover version. We should mention that it is a cover version from the soundtrack Z, right? The B-side, O Andonis. And who brought that to the band?
You did, Bruce. Pretty sure.
Yeah. I had found a copy of the Z soundtrack at Rhino Records in Westwood, and I just fell in love with it. There were 3 or 4 songs on that I thought were just great. And we tried a couple of the other. Actually, we did versions of all 3. There's a version of the song "Chase" that is on the Tape Excavation. Robert and Mark and I recorded that in my parents' garage, and we tried to work on it a bit, but we never really got it down, and we moved on. And we ended up doing O Andonis, because it really seemed to work well, especially once we got, Phil back in with his guitar contributing. And then later on, the other song that I thought was really good ended up being recorded on the Jamahariya record, Pios Den Mila Yeti Lambri. I suppose I'm saying it correctly, but that was a fun one. That was a tricky one to get too. We couldn't. for some reason, I don't know, we were probably playing in the wrong key or something, but I don't know anything about keys, so you know, it is what it is, and it
Yeah.
works.
What did we used to call it? Did it have an old name?
I don't recall. Yeah.
So then, Robert, was it your choice to pick which instrument you played on each song, or was it just out of necessity?
It was kind of more necessity, I think. It was like, this song, probably Bruce or Phil said something like,
Oh.
"This song needs a keyboard," or "This song needs a
Do you
bass."
hear me?
Hey, there you.
Oh,
We hear you.
We hear you, but
Okay.
so Robert, you were saying out of necessity, and maybe Phil had suggested what instrument you play.
well, for sure, it was on Film Noir. He suggested a
The
keyboard.
keyboard. Okay.
That was his song. I'm pretty sure that he brought to the band, as I
Okay.
remember. And I played a keyboard that was at Radio Tokyo. I remember
Oh.
my Casio didn't quite work for that type
Oh.
of thing at that time. And Phil suggested I played some keyboard that was there. So it was like an ARP or something. I don't remember.
Okay.
I used the keyboard that was there. And then for O Andonis, I had hey, there you are, Greg. Sort of.
Sort of, kind of.
Anyway, I borrowed a bass from I think it was a roommate at the time, Eric Feldman. He used to be in Captain Beefheart at
Oh
the time.
wow.
He had a Dan Electro bass, and I didn't own a bass, so I remember borrowing his. I remember the strings were about this far from the
There he is.
from the neck, and it was like, oh my God,
Wow.
it's so hard to play. Anyway, I think I
You
took
did fine.
I took that to it was a nice Dan Electro. It was old thing.
So was that the same bass that got used on some Captain Beefheart music, perhaps?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was just.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hey there, Greg.
Hello. I'm still trying to get
You're
this.
starting to float slowly into the
Yeah.
visuals.
It's all about making an appearance for Greg.
It's I gotta make a. Let's see what happens. Nah, it's still like backwards. Anyway, I'll just go over here. Good enough.
To bring you up to date, Greg, we were talking about Robert joining the band and how that all came about. I know that you had some very interesting thoughts about the band at this point that you wanted to discuss.
Well, it was actually about the songs themselves, because on the single, because it really represents like kind of a pivot point for the band in terms of the direction, and a progression of things. It also set up particularly well, not just with film, I mean the song Film Noir, but with O Andonis, that's kind of like the genesis of a big following in Greece and everything else. And when I was talking with Jeffrey earlier, I was saying it was sort of like when Wire went from doing from Pink Flag to 154. It's not that it's like this you're ditching the stuff from the past. It's a progression of things, and it opened up a lot of very interesting doors. One thing that was that I was always curious about, and I guess you covered that earlier, was how Robert came into the band, and also as far as the song itself, Film Noir. What was the process of doing that, and Phil's writing, if you know anything like that? Unfortunately, he's not here to grill him on that.
Well, Film Noir was a song that Phil brought to the band. He's like, "Hey, I've got this song. I really think I think it's a great song. Let's do this." And we all said, "Yeah, okay, sure. Let's do this." It's interesting that you bring up 154, because that was definitely in my mind a very important record in the early 80s there. And I know that when we were recording Film Noir, I mean, I know Robert did his keyboard part, but I remember doing a keyboard overdub on that specifically because I wanted to do something like Wire did on 154. And then people like, Jack Rabbit and the Big Takeover, he picked up on that. I remember, mentioning that in his review. So definitely I wanted to kind of give it give that song. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that we were always trying to do early on was find different ways of putting songs together, instrumentation wise. So Film Noir is a song that has no bass. There's 2 guitars, keyboards, drums, and vocals. And so because it had no bass on it, I felt like it needed to be fuller in the recording. And that was the reason I wanted to put that second keyboard on there, was just to fill out the audio space there a bit better.
So you're doing a more lower, you're playing in a low register.
Yeah, I think so. I'd have to, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like it's there, but it's real subtle. You know, it's not stepping on the other keyboard part that's in there. It's a very, very atmospheric song. You know.
Yeah. Well, and I remember,
evocative.
We performed it live a number of times around that time, and it always seemed kind of really thin in live performance and not have as much power as I felt it needed. And, yeah, we probably should have had another musician on there too. And eventually we did, Jeff Long came back. I don't know.
So,
anyway.
So on some of the, because I think the first time I ever saw you guys was I can't remember if Jeff Long was playing, but I mean I remember hearing that song. It was like at the Fiesta House or someplace like that.
Yeah. I think there's a chance that Jeff wasn't in the band at that point. Yeah, that was one of the things we talked about early on. Is that Jeff had temporarily left the band just before the Tragic Figures album came out, and that was when Robert came in.
Mm-hmm.
And things didn't work out with Jeff staying with Wasted Youth, and we had released the album and we're getting a lot of attention. He's like, oh well, we should this is a good thing. And so he came back, and it was great. I mean, we were really good as a 5-piece, I think.
Yeah, that was a pretty good time, I thought. I mean, Jeff Long was like Jeff Long. I mean, he was insane.
He's pretty amazing.
He was a force of nature, and yes, maybe troubled, or maybe he had some things on his mind that he had to get off. But musician wise, and just as a bandmate, it was so much fun.
Yeah,
really fun to travel with. It was very philosophical, and just really a nice, great person.
Yeah, when we did that interview where he was participating, it was definitely, I'd never really talked to him much, and he just seemed like a really, really great guy, very, very intelligent person.
He's very thoughtful. It's funny because he might have had a reckless side, but he was very thoughtful. When traveling in the cars with him, he would, talk philosophy. It was like great. It was fun.
That's the greatest thing. Like a 17-year-old who's a reckless philosopher.
Yes,
it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, and his bass sound was like nobody else's. I just loved it. It was so crunchy, or
I was
stupid words.
Crunchy, booming and crunchy.
It was a good sound.
Yeah.
And
it's combined with the way he played too, with the finger plucking the strings, and is very nimble is kind of a good word, I think, for a lot of.
And he was a natural. He was like a natural on stage. I'm not sure how he felt, but it just seemed like, oh, he belongs here.
I saw him playing with Wasted Youth a couple times, and he definitely had real stage presence. One thing that also interested in me is at this time, and again, the idea of like things are kind of transforming. I know that now Robert, were you concurrently involved with 17 Pygmies? When did that kind of overlap? Because I know there were some of the songs that were, I guess, were going to be part of the second Savage Republic album that ended up, being Pygmy songs. So I was always kind of curious as how that kind of came about, and just sort of the overlap, I guess.
It was messy. I forget exactly how, but but Hatikva came out in '83. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think after touring, I did a West Coast tour with Savage Republic. We did Mojave Desert, and Jeff left, and we did some shows as Final Republic. And I guess around that same time, Phil was saying, I want to make more pop songs. Well, no, he didn't quite put it that way, but you know, that type, you know, more ethereal stuff, whatever. And so we started getting together and working up a separate project. And then concurrently, somehow Savage Republic was still going. So yeah.
Yeah, after Jeff left, we the four remaining of us started working on new material, which was very different. And you were living in a house in Santa Monica, as I recall, and we rehearsed in your garage there for a while.
Right.
And we ended up recording a cassette demo of 6 songs to send to Rough Trade in San Francisco, because there was somebody there that was very interested in the band. And those songs sort of became the basis of what we started working on for what was to be the second Savage Republic album, and which eventually became the 17 Pygmies album, Jetted by the Sea. And really what happened there is that, I mean, most of those songs were sort of based around song ideas that Phil and Robert started with. So it was Phil's guitar, Robert's keyboard. I mean, a lot of really gentle, beautiful stuff that, to me, I was having trouble picturing it as Savage Republic. So I wanted to kind of make it more raw, bring more to the table that would kind of make sense from the people that had been following the band. And realistically, what it ended, I mean, my remembrance is that Phil and I basically had a disagreement in terms of the direction of the second album. And it was at that point that we finally split. And so he and Robert came to an agreement. He and Robert would take the music and complete it as a 17 Pygmies project. And then Mark and I would continue, and we would keep the name Savage Republic. And then that was when I started looking for new people to work with. So,
however, there was a number of things that were recorded as whatever Savage Republic stuff, and then it transformed into 17 Pygmies, you know.
Yeah.
Moment. Well, I forget all the different songs, but
yeah.
I remember a Moment in Ceylon was one of them, and there was 2 or 3 others and stuff.
Yeah, several others that had titles changed, and you know, and one of the things that I remember getting Phil to agree to was that at some point I could take those tapes and rework them as I wanted to picture them and release it as a Savage Republic release. And he was like, yeah, as long as you wait a year or 2, that's fine. And of course I never got around to it. So
it's actually kind of a pretty cool idea.
Yeah.
Still could be an interesting project to do.
Yeah.
I remember you had the bass line for Last Grave at Dimbaza, which is, I mean,
I think that was actually something that Phil came up with on the guitar, and I decided to do it on bass.
Yeah, it was good though.
So it's a good one. Yeah.
Now, also one thing I wanted to get into was, I know, one of the, I guess, connecting features of the people involved in the band over the years is their appreciation of soundtrack music, and it's big influence of those sorts of composers and stuff. What was the decision to record O Andonis? I mean, why did you pick that as the other song to put on the single?
Well, it was, I had been had the Z soundtrack, and I loved that song. I just thought it was such a great song. And I said, we should just try to do a version of this. This would be really cool. And until we did, and it really, we managed to work up, I think, a really interesting arrangement of the song and record. I mean, it really finally came together in the studio. I don't think we ever played it live before we recorded it in the studio. And I did a couple of guitar overdubs on that one, like the drum part at the end where it goes dun 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 dun, dun. I did this like percussion on an acoustic guitar to kind of boom 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 kind of thing, and then did the double picking on that. I think it was on that acoustic guitar at the very end part of it. So that was really fun for me to. It's like, okay, we got the basic tracks down, and then I could add flavor to it.
Yeah,
I was very pleased with how it came out.
Yeah, were you aware of the political significance and what it meant to people in Greece?
None whatsoever, none at all. I just thought it was a great song. And the interesting thing is that when we finally put the single out, we had just gotten a new distributor in Chicago, this guy named Nick Hodges, who had a company called, I think it was International Record Exchange. And I don't remember how we connected with him, but he started buying some of our releases, the Tragic Figures album, the Human Hands, and things like that. And I sent him a copy of the new single. And a couple of days later, I get a phone call. Bruce, you didn't tell me you put a Greek song on this. He's like, my brother has a record shop in Athens. Send me 100 copies. And so he just started sending hundreds of copies to his brother's record shop in Greece, and that changed everything. So
yeah,
it was a cool situation, and it, the Greek people were just great. I mean, the few times that I went over there, I know that the current band has been going over there quite a bit more than we ever did, but it was wonderful.
I'm sorry, this is a little off subject, but how are you guys received over there in Greece? I never got to go.
Really well. Really
yeah.
Well. Oh, great.
Yeah. They were practically carrying us, through the streets on their shoulders. Yeah, the band still has an enormous following over there, and the shows are very well attended and very, very enthusiastic audiences. Let's put it that way.
So, Greg, do you credit that to this single?
Absolutely. Because that's the thing is the average American isn't going to know much about the history of Greece in the 60s and 70s and everything, where they had a U.S.-backed military dictatorship, and that song was written, Mikos Theodorakis. It's an anti-government song. It's you could be arrested if you played it or sang it in public. It's serious shit. And I remember when we did that the first time that we did an out of California tour, where we did, we played in Houston and all those other, it was like 7 shows or something. And we played in Oklahoma City, and the band that opened for us was kind of a roots rockabilly kind of thing that was fronted by 2 brothers from Greece. And after we played that, after we did our set where we played that song, they were almost in tears. They came up to us, and it was like such an emotional thing. Like, you don't know how much this means to us as Greeks. Wow. So, that's, and again, we sort of, like I said, it's kind of into it. Wow. So, an interesting thing. And again, just from an aesthetic point of view, to me, it always seemed like, listening with on the single, it's a progression of stuff that was already there, but it's but still, the version is paying respect to the original.
Well, the original is an amazing piece. I mean, it's interesting because Nick Hodges started sending me, he had his brother collect a whole bunch of Theodorakis records. And I remember getting a box of like 30 Theodorakis albums in the mail from him at one point. I still have quite a few. I didn't need to keep them all, but there's several interesting versions of that song on these records. Some of them vocal, some of them instrumental. I think my favorite version is the one from the Z soundtrack. And you know, I'm really pleased that we did it, and I think we did it justice. I mean, I think it's one of the most beautiful anti-government songs ever. So
Yeah.
Bruce, I wanted to talk about the packaging because it's just gorgeous. I love it. So this is the
Thanks.
first pressing. I have the third pressing here, and if you look at the Savage Impressions book, you
They're on
see
the front cover too.
yeah, yes, yeah, absolutely. And then you can see that there's 4 pressings of the book,
Yeah.
this being the first, and then the 3, and they're all gorgeous. Can you talk about like the packaging?
So the picture of the flag, I felt like Savage Republic, we need our own flag. And so I made this flag, and you know, we're art students, so I had access to canvas and paints, and I made the Savage Republic flag. Phil and I took a trip out to the desert to kind of scout. I was going to do a film that we would do the soundtrack for, and my idea was it was going to be kind of a blend between Eraserhead and Lawrence of Arabia. And you know, the film never got made. I had no idea what it was going to be about. I just had this idea in my head that we should make a film in the desert. So Phil and I took a trip out to the desert, and I took this flag with me, and I had a big pole with it, and I had a camera. I think it was either Super 8 or I think it was a Super 8 film camera. And so Phil took pictures of me holding this flag in the wind, blowing in the wind. And I just thought, wow, this is a great image, and we should use it for this cover. So yeah, I mean, I in the photographic darkroom, you know, blew this little tiny Super film frame up to really big, and then I Xeroxed it and sent off for printing plates, and hand carved a linoleum block for the white background. And
Oh wow!
so it's, yeah, I mean, it was a project, and I just thought I really like the idea of not putting the name of the band on the cover, and just okay, this flag, this is going to represent this cover.
Wow, it's
And
fantastic. Yeah.
so yeah, that was how it all came together.
Robert, did you have any thoughts on the graphic? Because I know that you have an art background as well, right? So, what did you have any thoughts on the packaging?
Well, yeah, I mean, handmade. It's just handmade. For me, that's the thing I love the most about it, is that it's something that is, you can feel the person, you could feel the process. It's not 4 times removed. It's, you know, it's a thing of art and a thing of beauty. It's just lovely to own. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I like things. You know, I guess
Tangible objects.
I like objects. I like things. I like handmade things. And when you get something that's handmade, it always feels special, you know.
Yeah.
That's me, the best, most wonderful thing. And letterpress is just a gorgeous process.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it's time consuming and laborious, but the final thing is wonderful to hold in your hands, you know.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's why I've been so drawn to the letterpress process, is that you can make these handmade physical objects that are beautiful, but you can also mass produce them. And so yeah, and I'm still doing it.
So I think to Greg's point earlier about this being a big transition for the band, would you also say artistically? Because I mean, there's a style that is definitely developing with the recycled looking-ish background or corrugated background, or not corrugated, but just the visual.
Chipboard.
Yeah.
So do you think this release it was pivotal as far as developing that visual style?
Well, I
Or-
think, yeah, it's part of that whole process. I mean, the interesting thing is that like Tragic Figures was a collaboration between Phil and I in terms of the covers, because the front cover was something that I saw this poster on the wall at UCLA that had that photograph and this red Farsi lettering over it. And I just thought, that's such an amazing image. I want to do something like that for our cover. So that was sort of my homage to that thing. And I think the original picture that I took of that poster on the wall is in the Savage Impressions book, because I still have that Polaroid photo that I took of it. I'm really glad I snapped that Polaroid, because literally a week later it was gone.
Oh,
It would been covered up by something else. But the back cover was a collage that Phil did from various things that posters that he'd found around campus. So the film Noir single was in a way kind of similar. The back cover was Phil. He chose a lot of these different elements and said, I'd like to see these different things on the back here. And so I created little printing plates, and some of that is hand carved linoleum blocks. And then the stamp idea was something that I came up with. Oh, let's put a stamp on it. And then that's Phil's hand stamp. He hand stamped all of that first edition with his hand. So
only the first edition, right?
Yeah. I believe so. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure it's just the first edition.
Yeah. And
so again, it's kind of like I did the front cover, but it was a photo. It was from an image that Phil actually took, because he was the one behind the camera when we were out there. So anyway, yeah, it's a collaboration. It's a step forward in that whole design aesthetic.
So it was originally released in an edition of 1,000, is that correct?
Yeah, 1,000 numbered copies. I think we probably pressed, I don't know, 1,100 or 1,200, and there were a couple, some promotional copies that unnumbered.
So then those, I think those sold out relatively quickly, if I'm not mistaken, because you were already doing a second edition, I think in the same year, which was 83, if I'm not mistaken. So
sure, yeah.
Again, referencing Savage Impressions, you mentioned in there that you wanted to do something differently with the preceding, the successive editions. Can you talk a little bit about that? That you didn't want to do the exact same thing for the second and eventually.
Yeah, I mean, and part of that comes from the fact that, okay, you're standing there hand feeding 1,000 sheets of paper through the press 3 times for a 3-color thing. I mean, that's literally days of work. And not that I didn't enjoy it, but I just thought, well, I've already done it this way. As an artistic thing, I'd like to try doing it a little different. And so I moved some elements around, or changed the borders and changed the color. And I'm like, okay, this keeps it interesting for me standing here at the press for days, So that was, I mean, it wasn't like I was trying to create something for future collectors to do, although that's kind of fun, but it wasn't the reason for it. It was like, hey, as an artist, I want to keep myself interesting. I want to keep myself interested in what I'm doing.
Yes. And in the label itself is absolutely gorgeous on the record itself. So how was this printed?
Those are letterpress printed as well. We had, there were a couple of pressing plants that were willing to use my letterpress printed labels, although because they were on the brown craft paper, the paper is very porous. And so a lot of times the presses, like if it wasn't a hand-fed record press, it might suck up 2 or 3 labels at a time and try to put them on. There are some, copies of IPR records that have multiple labels on them.
Kind of cool, and kind of peel it off, and
yeah, there's another one underneath. But anyway, and it didn't only happen to my labels. I've bought records before, and that were made in the 60s that have double labels on them.
So, Robert, another question for you. You've been part of quite a number of releases, but was this your very first recording that you were a part of that got released?
Yeah.
As far as I know, I thought it was.
Yeah,
So,
yes, it was. Hatikva came out in '83. I guess the O Andonis came out in '82. What, filming
I
wise?
think it was early '83.
Okay, so yeah, I think that was before Hatikva. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was interesting.
so were you excited to have a release that was, like you said, something tangible that you could hold? Um, I'm sure you had played music for quite a while.
Yeah, I love recording. I love playing with these guys. Great. It was exciting. Touring was really fun, and at least the first years of touring was, I know it was problematic. Of course, with Mark and hallucinating and things like that. It was problematic, but it was exciting. Very exciting, and the music was really a pleasure to do. It was, it's like whatever else is happening, once you're playing the music, you kind of forget everything else. It's like it felt great. It was just fun to do. And I think I had a Rickenbacker. I got to double some, I think I was doubling monotone stuff on a Rickenbacker, 12-string Rickenbacker. I had the Den Electro bass, so I was playing bass, and then I was playing that modified Casio. It was fun. I
So,
wasn't good percussion. I think I tried to do percussion, but could not keep it.
so how did you enjoy being in the band with Mark Erskine, the drummer and percussionist of the early
Oh, I
70s?
love Mark. He was a sweetheart, but extremely troubled. I mean, I remember on tour that we were driving, and I was driving, he was sitting in the passenger seat, and he said, "That guy in that car over there said he wants to kill me." I was like, "Really? What else did he say?" I was like, I knew that he was hallucinating. It's just, and I think he knew he was hallucinating, but it's difficult to try to navigate that world, because I wasn't the trained psychologist or anything. So, you're just like, you just do the best. You fumble through it.
The thing is, with that kind of condition is, even though it's a delusion, it's absolutely real to the
Oh,
person that's
absolutely.
happening. Because I remember a similar thing. We were driving through, I don't know, like Kansas or something, maybe, and he got real upset. I said, "Well, he looked really agitated." And I said, "What's the matter, Mark?" And he goes, "That guy in that Ford over there called me an asshole." I said, "Mark, we're traveling on the interstate at 75 miles an hour. That car is 60 or 80 feet away from us. There's no way you think about it. There's no way you could hear, even if it was yelling, you couldn't hear what he said." He goes, "Oh no, I heard it. I have really good hearing." So, it's absolutely real. So, yeah, but Mark was always amazing. I mean, as you know, given his challenges, contribution in the way that he did his percussion and his sense of time. I mean, I've had, other drummers that hear what he goes, what he was doing, and it's like, I have no idea how he does this. It's like he has this flexible pulse to things, and these are trained drummers, studio guys, and they're just like, he's amazing, and it's all just you know came out fully formed. He was a natural in that sense.
It was kind of always like living on the edge of a razor or needle, though.
Yeah,
It was scary and yet exciting at the same time. You never quite knew if things were going to hold together, but
there were a few times where you knew that if he had gone off his meds for a few days and then he went back on them, if you were playing that night, at least the first half of the show is going to be at half speed. until he kind of got reacclimated to the Haldol. So yeah.
So Bruce and Robert, I had a question. So after this was released, were you guys already thinking about your next release and getting back into the studio? I think, if I'm not mistaken, Tragic Figure comes up next. Is the next single. Were you guys already thinking about what to do next after Film Noir? Or were you more thinking about live shows?
Well, yeah, what came after the, I mean, you know, obviously we were trying to continue doing shows as much as we could, but yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly when this got released, and I would have to kind of look back at some to see, but I think that when this came out, by the time this came out, I think Jeff Long was gone from the band. And so we were, you know, Robert and Phil and Mark and I were regrouping and working on this new material that, you know, eventually became the 17 Pygmies album, or the basis of it. So,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we were working on new material. And as far as the Tragic Figure 7-inch EP, those were old recordings from prior to the Tragic Figures album.
Oh,
And part of that, those were some of the parking garage recordings that I did before we went into Radio Tokyo. And the way that EP came about was that in early 1984, I got together with Stuart Sweezy and Michael Shepard and rented space in the Nate Starkman building. And Michael Shepard had started his label, Iridescence Records, and he had a deal with a pressing plant in Hollywood, Tabrex Enterprises, who would press his records and you could pay him like in 30 days or 60 days or something like that. And so Michael just said, hey, we should do another Savage Republic record, and we'll do it as a split, you know, a co-release between Iridescence and IPR. And so that's how that one came about. And it was just, it didn't go in the studio or anything. I was like, hey, I've got these recordings, they're pretty interesting. We should make another single. So.
Okay. Robert, were you ever part of the writing process with Savage Republic? Or were songs brought to you in the band and you would add your parts? I know we're talking about what you and Phil were working on, that eventually became The Jedi by the Sea.
Well,
So,
that was the stuff that I was kind of more co-writing.
okay.
I don't know. Bruce and I might have worked on a few things that, you know, he mentioned Chase and a few other things.
There's that other piece that is on the Tape Excavation album that I call The Unknown, which I had completely forgotten about, and I just found it on one of those cassette tapes from, you know, one of the garage rehearsals in Mar Vista, and I was like, okay, I sort of remember this, and you're doing this really creepy keyboard thing that's very cool, and Mark's drumming along, and I'm doing, I think it's like a bass through a fuzz box or something. And those are the only three instruments that I can figure on that. So I think, you know, that might have been one of the things that we were jamming on while we were waiting for Phil to show up, you know?
Yeah.
I think that was how that happened. And it's an amazing piece.
Yeah, I loved your fuzz bass. That was a good sound.
Robert, I've always been a fan of your keyboard style. I think it's very, very unique. Did you have any, in a good way, did you have any influences, or were you just feeling your way through the instrument? Or your style is just really, really cool.
Stumbling my way through. I don't know.
I
don't know what my influences are, to be honest. I mean, I listened to a lot of even back then I was listening to weird classical music, but I wasn't classically trained, you know, but I love Stravinsky. I don't know, you know, but I don't know, Eno and Bowie. I don't know. I can't even think of who was influenced by it back then. I forget.
Did you ever sit down with records and try to figure them out?
No, I think, you know, a lot of really good musicians do that, but I didn't do that. I sat down with records and tried to figure out what they were doing, how to play cover, so to speak, other people's music. I was, too into I want to do it my way or something. But so I'm just stumbling around and going like, oh, I like it this way and I don't like it this way. So, that's.
So you weren't sitting there listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Pink Floyd and like your multi-keyboard setup, like trying to
No,
figure.
I'd actually never even heard Pink Floyd till I was, like after, I don't know, 2020. I don't know,
Okay.
a couple of years ago. I'd never listened to those guys.
Okay.
I don't know, but maybe I got influenced by a lot of stuff because, we did that one song that had all those clocks in it that I came up with.
Oh, in the Scenic album? Yeah.
Yeah, this is later, and I came up with these clocks, and then I just like only about 4 or 5 years ago did I hear like, oh shit, I must have ripped that off from
Dark Side of the Moon.
Dark Side of the Moon, and I didn't even realize it because I didn't have Dark Side of the Moon, but they have a bunch of clocks and theirs sound way better than ours did. It was like, oh shit,
Well, they could afford
how
good
embarrassing.
clocks.
Yeah.
Like having 1,000 clocks, I thought that was so original and weird, and it was like, I think it's been done. I think,
No, I can't wait to talk about Scenic. You guys did some great stuff with that.
Sorry, it's off the subject, but
No. Greg, did you have any other thoughts before our last 10 minutes wraps up?
It was great to finally speak to you, Robert, after a hell of a long time.
yeah, well, let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
A different conversation. Hey, can I share my screen? I want to share something really quick.
Please,
I want to
yes.
spring it on you guys. All right, can you see this?
It popped up. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
it.
All right, so there's
Wow.
this was on a tour, a West Coast tour. And I really love taking photographs, but unfortunately I was not a good photographer. As you'll see, I only have 2 photographs, by the way, or 2 images to share.
Those are great pictures.
Right.
But
great.
I thought it was a really nice picture of Mark, and then there's a nice picture of Mark and Jeff, and that's one photo. The one on my left, I don't know about yours.
The black and white one, or the
Yeah,
kind of
that's
sepia
not
one?
2 photos. The one with Mark and Jeff together.
Wow.
That's one photo with. It just happens that there's a thing down the middle.
That's amazing.
We were in a nightclub. And then the one up above, this one, that was in Portland. I'm pretty sure that was in Portland.
Was that basement place we played?
I don't remember the name of the place, but I'm pretty sure I was playing keyboards and I had a lull, like, okay, I'm not playing in this part. So I picked up a camera and took a.
That's great.
That is a great shot.
I think that was the show at Sumus Theater, SUMUS. And well, because I remember that the band that we played with who put this on did a silkscreen poster, spacing on their name right now, but there's actually that particular show that recordings from live performance 81 to 83, the song where Mark leans over into his microphone before we start playing and says, "Whoever spit on my drums, come lick it up." That was that show.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a good line.
Yeah.
I heard all kinds of good stuff about that, interesting stuff about that Portland show.
So Robert, what about these images on?
So this is proof that I was actually in the band.
Yeah.
I know
Who took these photos?
I don't know, but someone gave me some photos. Obviously I didn't take. I probably took the one of Bruce while on stage.
Okay.
But the other 2 I didn't take, and I don't know. So I think I have a Rickenbacker or I have the Dan Electro. I'm not sure which, and I'm playing keyboard at the same time.
Is that the Casio?
And there's the modified Casio.
Yeah.
Wow. These are great.
Anyway,
amazing.
uh-oh.
Nice show.
I unshare. There we go.
Wow.
Nice. Thanks, Robert.
Those are great. All right. Well, this is going to shut down in another minute and a half. But thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk about this record. Like I said, this is Film Noir is one of my top 5 IPR releases for sure, and it's
Good
really,
one.
yeah, it's great. Both sides are fantastic, visually, musically, and having Robert in the band now is just very cool. And Robert, we really appreciate you joining, and of course, Bruce,
Yeah, thank you.
we really appreciate hearing about this time. I know it's decades ago, so it's probably hard to remember everything, but it was just great to hear you guys talk about it.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.